Hey guys, so in the podcast when I'm chatting with Alek, I mentioned this being a 70 millimeter window, and I said that this one was a 60 millimeter window. And then I felt them, and I said, well, they feel to be about 2 centimeters apart. And during the podcast, I'm like, that math doesn't make sense. I'm like, well, I'll have to figure out what's going on with that later. So I wanted to figure out what was going on with that. So I did this, and this is actually 55 millimeters. So I got measuring tape out, and I measured that. Okay. And that there is 55 millimeters, and this one is 70. Okay, but you can see it's also quite a lot wider. This is about 120 millimeters wide, and this is 130 millimeters wide. Okay, so the window design not only matters this way, but this way. So I could configure the bell on my wrist and with my anatomy so it'd sit farther down my wrist. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a pen here. Also, to note, this handle is 34 millimeters. And this handle is 38 millimeters. Okay, so there's a difference there as well. But I'm going to grab this. Okay, I'm going to hold it in a neutral or slightly flexed position. Okay, and I'm going to keep that the same on the next time that I do it with the other bell. Okay, so I'm going to mark this, okay, where it sits. Okay, so I've marked that right here. So this is bell A. Okay, so you can see that. That's bell A right there. And this one's going to be where bell B sits, the P-Spec kettlebells that I designed. Okay, that there is the P-Spec. Okay, so that's P-Spec. Okay, and what's that difference? 2.5 centimeters. So that sits 2.5 centimeters farther down my wrist. Okay, a lot less torque and a lot less demanding and painful on the back of the bones of the wrist. And that's why the design of the kettlebell matter. Okay, and that's also why the P-Spec kettlebells from Great Lakes Girya Pro, the ones that I designed and I promote for Great Lakes Girya Pro, okay, that is absolutely fantastic. So if you want the P-Spec kettlebell, the smaller bells, go check out greatlakesgiryapro.com. Okay, and if you're interested in ordering the monster bells, okay, you can check out the greatlakesmethod.com. Okay, two different locations to get these bells, okay, in North America here. Anyways, some interesting information here. I find it extremely interesting. And that's just why these windows, very nice. Very nice.
All right, we are live. Well, quasi live. I mean, anybody who's listening to this now is going to be listening to the recording. And if you're asking, what am I listening to? Well, then let me introduce you. Hello, my name is Alek Salkin. I am also known as the Hebrew Hammer, and this is the Hammercast. And I am here with Colin Lake, who is with Great Lakes Girya Pro. He manufactures kettlebells, and he's somebody that I've wanted to have on the podcast for a very long time because I think that when people think of fitness, the first thing they think of is equipment. You know, they think of whether it's, you know, from the old school and they're thinking about barbells and dumbbells or machines. There's always somebody in the background who had the idea to come up with various different pieces of equipment. And although the kettlebell is ancient enough that we can't really, you know, peg down just one person who is responsible, we do have some pioneers in the modern age who are helping people to get stronger, fitter, and healthier with kettlebells. And we're going to dive into some detail, in particular on the Great Lakes Girya Pro style of kettlebell, which I think you're really going to like. Colin and I were talking at length about it before we kicked things off. One final thing that I will mention before we begin: if you have not already, I highly recommend that you get your own free copy of my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. Great Lakes Girya Pro kettlebells are going to be an excellent option for this. And if you are brand new to kettlebells, this will also be very good for you because the moves in it are super simple. It takes like 30 seconds to learn them. And there's also a bodyweight stuff that's going to take 30 seconds to learn, but it's full body. So you get in, out, and strong in short order. If you go to 9minutechallenge.com, you can get your own complimentary copy. That is the number 9minutechallenge.com. And I'll put a link in the description. You can check it out at your earliest convenience. But now let us welcome Colin. And first of all, thank you very much for taking out some time from your day of hoisting 60-kilo kettlebells aloft overhead with ease and saying, okay, on my training break, I'm going to do this podcast interview. So I appreciate you being here.
Hey, I appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast. I really do.
No, I'm serious about this lifting stuff, man, because I've seen some of the stuff that you've done. And, you know, a lot of times you think about like equipment, like let's say fitness equipment manufacturers, and you're like, all right, they had an idea, worked well, but, you know, maybe they're just like the ideas person. But there are a couple of examples of people who stand out who are actually like as strong and jacked as the people that they are selling the stuff to. Like Arthur Jones was, you know, a great fitness equipment creator, and he was also bodybuilder and we'll say training philosopher, and he came up with a lot of different pieces of equipment. And what you're doing in particular, I find very interesting with Great Lakes Girya Pro, because you are putting together kettlebells that have a design that is intended to be a bit more friendly to the user. And I want to make sure that we get into this in a little bit. But before we do, let's get to know the man behind this mission to make the best kettlebells possible. Tell us a little bit about your origin story. Like, were you always interested in strength training, or did you start off in like team sports as a kid? Or give us a little of a background of that.
Yeah, team sports. I fell in love with soccer. Just had a soccer game last night. I still play competitive soccer. Had a great game last night. But yeah, I got involved. Like, I was very high energy as a kid. Still am very high energy. And I started playing soccer when I was 6 or 7. And got introduced to the fitness bug at that point. As a young guy, I started doing push-ups in my room and stuff like that, and just practicing bicycle kicks and on my bed, and just doing fun things that had to do with sports and fitness. And it was just always what I really loved. I loved recess. I loved gym class. I took 2 gym classes in high school in like 2 semesters. In one semester, I took 2 gym classes. I just absolutely love fitness. And yeah, so when I did to become a professional soccer player, actually, here in Canada. And I tried out for Toronto FC, scored a couple goals. Anyway, it was more of a money grab. But anyway, it was a really cool experience. And when I didn't get selected for TFC, I went on and continued to train in the CSL, Canadian Soccer League. But I was on the second team, so I wasn't on the first team. But I wasn't technically but my work ethic and my drive and my conditioning and my strength was always there, and my heart. There's no lack of the heart. But anyway, when I was 21, I did that. I got hit by a car when I was 20, and I got $35,000 from going into a windshield and landing. I actually jumped up before the car hit me and smashed off the windshield and landed behind the car. And it buggered my shoulder up. I had about 45 stitches up my shoulder here. And so then I took that money, went to take a couple of years to play soccer and try and get paid to play. That didn't happen. When that didn't happen, I decided that I have to actually start making money for a living. I would start working for a living and making money. So I got a job at Good Life, a gym here in Canada. Very easy to get the job. All you got to do is go and do like a weekend certification, and then you're a personal trainer. It sounds, a lot of people are like, oh my God, like that's not good. Like you're going to hurt somebody. But like, you know what I mean? With don't have the experience. Anyone can just go in and then their personal trainer looking after people. But if it wasn't for that opportunity, I wouldn't have started down that path. I worked for Good Life for 7 years. I was a top trainer there. I invested about $60,000 or so into continuing education. And this is where it gets into the kettlebell bug. So I invested all this money and I started going to courses like Anatomy of Motion with Girya, What the Foot, StrongFirst, neurokinetic therapy, fascial stretch therapy. So really, some really game-changing courses. If you've never seen those are really, really neat courses. Neurokinetic therapy is how the body, it's muscle testing and neurological efficiency. So it's really, really an interesting course. And the common denominator between all those things was kettlebells. Okay, so I started getting into, so all these smart people always had kettlebells around them. So I would try to be surrounding myself with a lot smarter people in the room. It isn't very hard, but when you get to learn from people and see what is working for smart individuals and helping people get stronger and better, then I was picking up on that, and I started picking up the kettlebell, and it was challenging for me at first. Normally I'm the type of person that gets something like right away, and the kettlebell swing, I couldn't get it. It took me like a few weeks to get the kettlebell swing. Anyway, it was challenging and it was bugging me. And if I can't get something, I really want to work hard to get it. So I really like that aspect of it. And so I started getting into the kettlebells, and then I signed up for my first SFG in Montreal in 2016. And that was my first real exposure to kettlebells. I went there, and on that time, I believe the snatch test was on the second day. It wasn't on the third day. So anyway, I was on the first or second day. I think it was the second day, but I did the snatch test, and I didn't prepare for the snatch test. I thought I was going to walk in and it'd be easy. All right. I think I got about 70 reps in. I busted open my hands, went out on lunchtime at break, seriously contemplated not returning to the cert. And then I brushed that off and had an amazing time learning the technique of the hardstyle snatch and the atmosphere at StrongFirst. And I went to get my level 1 and ended up passing the next day when I got to retake my snatch test. And yeah, it was, I fell in love with it. I hated how hard it was, but I really loved it at the same time, because something that is very, very hard for you to do, you can learn stuff from it. And just with the kettlebell, I just, with the knowledge of my body that I have, it's just so corrective in nature, and it allows you to expose weakness in the body, and it gives you an opportunity to look at that weakness and make it your strength, and then you can start improving. So I just really love the kettlebell. I found no better. I am biased because I promote and sell kettlebells, but it doesn't change the fact that how I feel about how I truly believe that it's the best tool for all around strength and conditioning.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's great hearing your story, because I've heard from other people who have a very strong athletic background, and, you know, to the point of like competitions and everything like that. And a lot of them say the same thing, is that they thought that the kettlebell would be much easier. And then the first time they pick it up, although what's interesting about the kettlebell is that it can help you become more athletic. It can help you to build more strength and build more power. I think the people who were like me, because I'm like the opposite of you. Like there was nobody who was ever going to pay me to play any sport. There was like no chance it was ever going to happen, with the lone exception of badminton, because I found out that I was good at it in like high school gym class. I just didn't realize that it was an Olympic sport. I thought it was like a gym class sport. Sucked at everything else. But I similarly struggled with kettlebells, and I think a big part of it is because it's like distilling down the movement patterns that you need in order to be both strong and athletic. And if you don't have them, it can help you build them. And if you do have them, it can help you to get better consciousness, let's say, of how your body's supposed to work and how your body's supposed to move. But, like Pavel, the founder of StrongFirst, has said, big guys often find the barbell works a bit better for them. They take to it more easily. And little guys, calisthenics really works well for them. But the kettlebell challenges everybody pretty much equally. because it's going to find you where you have the weakness, like you talked about, having weaknesses that are going to get exposed, and it's going to give you the opportunity to strengthen them. And the key is that you got to stick with it long enough in order to actually start making those changes. But in sticking with it, you've also got to have the right tools at your disposal. And one of the things that I think many people found is after the explosion in popularity of kettlebells, a lot of people wanted to get in on the action. So you had a lot of manufacturers that popped up and just wanted to sell kettlebells because they saw a trend. They saw the dollar signs in their eyes, and they were like, okay, well, what can we do to capitalize on this? And many people, their first kettlebell was not that great. I mean, that's definitely the case for me. I remember my first bell left something to be desired. And from what we were talking about earlier, it sounds like, you had some ideas in mind of what to do to make the kettlebell as high quality as possible, so that the people who are going to be using it and doing lots of reps with it and doing lots of work with it are going to have an enjoyable experience and not have to deal with, some of the problems that come with the more cheaply made bells that are sort of slapped together or not really thought through. So walk us a little bit through the thought process you had about how to make bells as high quality and as effective as possible for repeated use and for the ambitious trainee, whether he or she is an athlete or somebody just looking to, cut a few pounds and keep up with their kids or grandkids.
Yeah. So when in 2017, I was transitioning from working at Good Life to doing my own thing. And I wanted to get some kettlebells to sell to my students that were working. So I was also going to start an e-commerce site up, like a website, and just start that as a side hustle. And then, but I wanted to have good quality tools. My dad's always taught me to have a good quality tool. He's fixed cars all his life. He's not a mechanic. He was a pilot, but he fixed the cars all the life. And he's got a very meticulous mechanic set. And he's very meticulous with his tools. And he respects his tools and the quality of the tools. And that's something that's been ingrained into me. And I just hate using a low quality tool for the most part. And when I started importing kettlebells, I imported a few and they were okay. And I stumbled upon, I believe it was an RKC bell at a gym at Athletic Leaders, I believe, in Mississauga with Granville Mayors. And I saw a kettlebell there, and the handle, the grip of it and the coating was phenomenal. And it was a thicker handle, and I did like it. But the coating stuck out to me. And the coating on the kettlebell, it really feels, when you make a connection with the kettlebell, I can feel a difference when you have a nice quality coating. It just feels good when you grab it. There's that connection with the grip. You can go with powder coating, but and that there's nothing wrong with that. I just prefer the feeling with the e-coating, and it's a lot more chip resistant, and it's adhered to the kettlebell a lot better. So it's a lot higher quality of a coating. So it's just a superior coating in my opinion. And so I wanted that coating. So I knew I wanted that coating. And then I also, the design of the kettlebell, the window, was a big deal as well. At that point in time, I just knew that a smaller window didn't feel very good and a larger window felt better. So I found a kettlebell supplier that had 70 millimeter window height. Okay, so, and this specific manufacturer had it from a 4, an 8, 10, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, and 32, all up to over the 70 millimeter window. So that felt really, really good. Now the 70 millimeter window, the RKC bells, I believe, are 60. And that 1 centimeter makes a huge difference. I am not a huge math guy. I never took physics, right? But like the torque on the wrist that you get, because that creates from the fulcrum, is a big difference. And I was doing some chat GPT before we got here, and I don't know how accurate it is, but it was saying that 1 centimeter difference on the same kettlebell was about a 20% more effort that you had to hold the kettlebell, okay, with the wrist. Okay. So it's just very interesting with the design of the kettlebell. So knowing that, I wanted to have that 70 millimeter. But going back to the importing of the kettlebells, so I had that one set of kettlebells from the first import that I had. Now I was training with that set of kettlebells. Now I was doing up to I believe 56 kilogram get up at the time, and everything was going real good. Okay, now that was a little bit larger of a window on that specific design of kettlebell. Now I had another kettlebell shipment come in that wasn't the good quality bells. It was a different one, but that came in, and I sold the original set that I had, and I went to do a 56 kilogram kettlebell get up, and I couldn't do it. And I was wondering, why can't I do this? What the heck's going on? And I really dove into the window, and the window was shorter. Okay, and it changed where you're sitting with the weight. So here is a 16 kilogram kettlebell. Okay, and it's sitting right on the back of the wrist bones. Right, you can extend the wrist and have it go down a little bit, and I think that's advantageous over some bells over maybe 60 kilograms. To have your wrist go out of flexion. But for learning purposes and anything like that's a small bell, I really like to instruct people to have that neutral lift. But with the larger window, you can see right there, it's sitting right there. Now that's right on the back on sensitive area. Now homunculus or whatever the heck it is, like the sensory perception guy, the huge hands, right? There's a lot of sensory in the hands, okay, an extreme amount. So it's very, very sensitive. So when you start pressing in on that, pain has this, it shuts off the strength, right? And not only that, it's just mathematically, it's physically harder to have the kettlebell sit up higher up there because of the torque. Okay, so this is a 16 kilogram, and it's sitting probably, I don't know, it actually looks about 2 centimeters down. So even though it's a 1 centimeter difference in the window, it seems to be sitting about 2 centimeters down.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference on how it feels and getting the proprioceptive perpendicular to the floor, right? So when you're doing with the kettlebell stuff, right, you got to really master your wrist position. Right, so you got flexion, right, like that. You got extension, and then you got your ulnar and radial deviation, right? And then that influences the power point of the palm, so the bicep and the tricep, right? So your wrist position, as you know, is absolutely huge in stabilization in the arm. It can help it. Now, it gets me onto a tangent here. Like, yes, when you're doing an overhead press, you can stack your arms and not have any grip involved at all, and you can just stack the bones and stabilize with the shoulder. But then you can get into the radiation and having the grip to assist you with that stabilization. So then you can, it's just a tool, right? So you want to have the bones in the overhead position to lock out, right? But if you can go up there and squeeze it as well, well, now you can add in the stabilization of the grip and into the shoulder. But back to the kettlebells, I had to find, so I went with the kettlebells that had the 70 millimeter window. Okay, but the thing is that only went up to 32 kilograms. So the manufacturer only had the molds up to 32 kilograms. Okay, so I imported those. Those are really good. That's known as the original lineup for the Great Lakes Girya Pro. That's called the R-Spec. Now we have other bells too that like the 36 kilogram. And so this is the 36 kilogram here. Okay, and that's a 60 millimeter window. Okay, this is a 32 kilogram kettlebell. And that's a 70 millimeter window. Okay, so it makes
you can see the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's also a little bit thicker of a handle. But so going back to that, so the original lineup I had that working for a few years, and then at 36 kilograms, it's goes back to the 6. And when it's great to have a short wind, a nice feeling kettlebell when you start out with kettlebells. So having the kettlebells available in the smaller sizes, up to 32 kilograms to the 70 millimeter window was great, and it felt good. But when you go to 36, it's a big jump, right? And now you've got to adjust your positioning in your wrist. So I am working on getting the other kettlebells produced in the near future. I came out with a P-Spec design. So the R-Spec kettlebells that we have from 4, 8, whatever, up to 32, those have a 70 millimeter, and the P-Spec kettlebells also have a 70 millimeter window up until 32 kilograms. Okay, and then after 32 kilograms, I don't have it in front of me, but they go up in stages. So the window will actually go up in stages, and it's going to be extremely beneficial. And I'm really excited about getting the next sizes of kettlebells out, because it's great to, again, have it for the beginners or up to 32 kilograms. And that really matters, to have a comfortable feeling kettlebell up into that weight. But I really am excited about getting into the heavier weights, so I can really get into things. And that goes into the origin story behind the bells and stuff. So when in 2019, before the pandemic, I had a goal of doing a Turkish Get-Up with a 72 kilogram kettlebell. I was big into doing Turkish Get-Ups at the time. Still am. I love Turkish Get-Ups. But I wanted to do a 32 or a 72 kilogram kettlebell. Okay, that would have been my body weight at the time. Okay, and there was no 72 kilogram kettlebells available. I did do a 72 kilogram kettlebell Turkish Get-Up, but it was a stacked 72 kilograms. So it was a 60 kilogram plus a 12. And it's crazy, just like the fulcrum and just like the size of the bell and the window design, how much easier it is. I could do it with the 60 with a large window and a stacked. Like I could do that, but I couldn't do, at the time, I couldn't do a 68 kilogram kettlebell that had a short window. But I could do a 60 that had a 70 millimeter window plus a stacked 12 on top of it. So it was really, really neat to me. And that's how I've kind of gone down this rabbit hole of the window, okay, and how it really affects things. Now, not saying that smaller windows are bad and you shouldn't use them, right? It's just knowing that wrist position and knowing the difference. But sometimes even on deeper kettlebells, they even have a slightly smaller window than 60, and that's just feels even worse, like the Walmart bells or something like that. Yeah, those are not a good feeling. But yeah, it was very interesting. So in 2019, I started chatting with Zach Kirchner and Kettlebell Carl about their opinion on the optimal design for a large kettlebell and the window. And then that's where I brought out the 72, 76, 84, 88, 96, and 100 kilogram kettlebells. Completely, like those, again, those are your massive bells. You don't really need to be getting up that big, but it was pretty neat. And to get the kettlebell to go up to 220 pounds or 100 kilograms was pretty neat. So I was pretty happy about that.
That is exciting. Having swung on a couple of occasions, I think it was a 92 kilo kettlebell. I always thought, man, you feel like you're wielding like a power that you just can't wield with other ones. And then all of a sudden too, the 48 kilo, the 106 pounders, they don't seem so big and bad, and everything else seems, a lot more achievable. But what you're talking about with the window, which, for people who are wondering what he means, this is the hole in between the bell and then the part of the handle that you actually grab onto. And so the sides of it are called the horns, and then the window is where you actually insert your hand. And I love what you pointed out about the hand position in particular, because the kettlebell is so heavy on what your hands need to be doing. There's like really nothing that you can do where your hands aren't playing a central role. You think about the barbell It's pretty similar, but similarly, you've got back squats, you've got Zercher squats. I mean, there are ways that you can handle a barbell where the position of your hands and your wrists is, like a secondary consideration. With the kettlebell, as you pointed out, I think very, very saliently with the Turkish Get-Up example, on a smaller scale, it may seem like it doesn't make a big difference. But if you're uncomfortable, like you pointed out, your wrist is in a disadvantageous position so that either the pain in the back of the forearm or just a wrist position that's not conducive to stronger pressing or snatching or that sort of a thing. It can also show up with the smaller bells because heavy is relative, but the design of the kettlebell is something that is going to be important regardless of the size that you're actually using. And in particular, I think it's very interesting that you point out like the size of the window being as important as it is, because now that I think about it, I look back, without question, it was always a smaller window that for me made the kettlebell worse. I didn't know exactly how to articulate it at the time. This would have been many, many years ago, but this was when I was first shopping around for bells. And it was always, I found, you mentioned Dragon Door. I found the Dragon Door bells to be really good. There were a few other brands that were also pretty decent. But for many people, they find it to be a game changer because now they're not, let's say, it's like, let's say in running equivalent, you're putting on running shoes that don't feel like they've got a rock in them, which has got to slow you down so that you're not feeling like you got to get hurt. With a kettlebell, you've got a bell that is going to allow your body to move the way that it's supposed to, rather than doing what we often expect a barbell to do, which is to require you to contort your body around the demands of the barbell. And you don't want that with a kettlebell, particularly given the fact that you're going to be doing a lot of ballistic movements. You're going to be doing a lot of repetitions with it. And so for the people who've listened closely, this is a big thing that you should take away, is that the quality of movement that your body can produce when you're using the kettlebells is going to be of the utmost importance, particularly as you start to increase in weight, as you start to increase in reps. And it sounds like you've gone a very long way in working toward this. And even though it seems like a minor change, even just from the examples you've given, it's actually like a huge difference in what you can actually do with your training.
I would agree 100%. And the risk, like I mentioned before, it's just knowledge. And like, I'm not saying like a flexed wrist is the go-to and that's what you have to do all the time. Right? It's a strong person. It's always, I like to look at really strong individuals and look what they're doing. Yeah. Right. And when I'm looking at Zach Kirchner, for example, he's my go-to because he really influenced me on getting into heavy bells. I looked at his get-up and he's such a strong individual, and I noticed his wrist was extended, and I'm like, well, I shouldn't have my wrist extended. I was taught not to do that. And I agree with that when you're teaching people. And I think like up until like a 40, I said 60 earlier, but I think up until like a 48 kilogram kettlebell, you should be able to keep your wrist in a neutral to slightly flexed position. Right. And then kind of after that, I kind of, in my opinion, I kind of let it go. And then, because when you're in that flex position, you're using that flexion, and you're less using the balance on the skeleton, right? So when you get heavier and you have this kind of continuum of this wrist, and then you allow it to get in the power point of the palm and learn to get strong in a slightly extended position, that can open up doors when you're comfortable in we'll say a compromise. It's not a compromised position, but that's what I've been taught to say. This is a compromised position, but it's not a compromised position if you can control it. Yeah. Right. But it's all, again, when you're when you're new to kettlebells, I would recommend neutral to flexed wrist and all that stuff. But the wrist position, the intrinsic muscles of the hand have a really interesting influence on your torso position, and little nuances in your wrist can really make or break the feeling of something and the lockout of the wrist. Like I find a lot of people in the lockout position, right, when they're here, if they don't get, if they are having some struggle with their overhead position, thoracic extension, all that stuff, right, to get a little bit of ulnar deviation up here, Okay, it's going to help to assist with the lockout of the elbow. Anyway, just little nuances in the wrist can really go a long way with helping folks. And yeah, it's the devil in the details that sometimes can make all the difference.
100%. And I think in particular, I'm glad you mentioned the overhead position too, because like what position could possibly be more perilous with a kettlebell, especially if you're doing a Turkish get-up and you're already in a position where, you know, it's not so easy to bail out, for instance, and you all of a sudden find yourself like your body is not able to get into the position, even in a minor way, like in the wrist and the hand position, that can have some pretty big effects downstream. And the last thing you want is a kettlebell hurtling perilously towards you as you're in like a half kneeling position or a windmill position of a Turkish get-up. It's much better to be able to control it in those positions than not. Now, on the topic of this, being like challenges that people have often had with, let's say, with kettlebell training in general, from your perspective, what's the biggest challenge people have when they buy their first kettlebell from you? They're coming from maybe a different manufacturer in most cases, or, maybe they got it from Walmart, or maybe they got it secondhand from, who knows where. Are there any challenges that people have when they buy their first kettlebell from you?
I think it's just in general, when people just first buy kettlebells, people are in general are soft these days, and they need to get some grit behind them, and they get a little bit of pain in the wrist and they're offended by it. Right? You got to like take that and channel it into strength and say, no, and squeeze it. Like it's similar to, I think it's a very sensitive area. I find that a lot of people that have issues with stabilization or positioning with the wrist, they have ankle limited range of motion. If you have limited range of motion in a joint, it's like those areas are sensitive and hypersensitive because they don't have adequate circulation. They don't have adequate movement, because most people don't move really well. And when you don't have joints that open and close properly in all the different ranges of motion and all the different planes of motion, then muscles aren't opening and closing and lengthening and shortening. So like things can kind of get like a little stuck. What I'm trying to say is, like, if someone's wrist is sore, it's probably because they haven't really done this, and all of the extensor tendons and all of the stuff up here is going to be really, really sore and sensitive. So that's a sign to get tougher. And a lot of people just aren't, it's easy to quit because it's hard and because it hurts you. That's an excuse that you tell yourself, that it's just, I don't want to use kettlebells because it hurts. And it's actually use that as an opportunity to get strong in that position. And that's goes on into kettlebells and with the overhead position and with the rolling pattern in the get up and in your squat. It's every movement that you're doing with the kettlebell is a movement assessment, and you can look at and scan. It's to feel how your body is doing in that movement. And you can load it up asymmetrically from side to side with a single kettlebell and find discrepancies from side to side and help to heal your body. It's so amazing what the kettlebell can offer and what you can do with a little bit of knowledge of knowing how your body should operate and knowing what a good movement is. Okay, it's absolutely amazing. So I got off on a tangent there on the kettlebell question, but to answer the question, one of the problems is just not having the fortitude and to go forward with it and to continue on with it. I think that's the biggest thing, is people just don't stick with it because it's hard.
Yeah, I think that on the topic, and particularly of the wrist position, because I've run into this repeatedly with my students over the years, is that you got to just convince them, like, right now it's going to feel uncomfortable, but as time goes on, your body's going to get conditioned to it, and it's not. And even the weights that you're using now are going to be fine, and then heavier weights similarly are going to be fine. And I think people are used to the idea that they're going to sweat and that they're going to pant and that their muscles are going to be sore and stuff like that. And they're just not used to it with other pieces of equipment that don't, many of which are like machines. You can get away with a lot with machines. Barbells and dumbbells, they're already more familiar with, just because our culture has had those as like a staple in the fitness world for a very long time. But with the kettlebell, I think they're a little bit surprised, not just at how difficult it is, even with lighter weights, but even in terms of just holding it against their body, just how much more effort it's going to take. And yeah, I agree with you on that. I think the bigger window does seem to help, but nevertheless, you've also got to, take that quick shake and harden up, as they say.
Sometimes I've used the small window in my programming, and I'll program a small window of a weight, say a 24 kilogram, and then maybe next week I'll use a 24 kilogram larger window, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels so much better, right? It's kind of goes to that feeling of lifting a really heavy bell, like the example, the 100 or 92 kilogram, and then you go back to the 48 and you're like, oh, that's not so bad, because you just lifted a really heavy one. And with the beginning of when you're getting into the kettlebells too, like when you start with really small kettlebells, most of them have really small windows, and that it is really sensitive. But the good thing is when you get stronger and the larger kettlebell, it sits a little bit farther down on the forearm. So as you earn your strength, it does start to get a little bit feeling better that way as well.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of earning their strength, where can people find Great Lakes Girya Pro? Check out the inventory and all the other good stuff.
Yeah, so there's some interesting things going on with Great Lakes Girya Pro. You can check out greatlakesgiryapro.com. There is some inventory there. But greatlakesmethod.com is coming out soon, and that's where you're going to be able to buy the largest kettlebells in the world, up to 164 kilograms. That greatlakesmethod.com is going to be dealing with the really, really big bells, and Great Lakes Girya Pro is going to be dealing with the smaller bells. So there's a bit of transitioning with parts of the lineups and different stuff, but those two places are going to be where you can get those bells, which is pretty cool.
That's exciting. So I'm going to make sure that I put those links into the description. So whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening in on your podcasting platform of choice, you can check them out. I highly recommend it. Good quality kettlebell will do a lot more for you for a longer period of time than just about any other piece of equipment. And it's the kind of equipment that you don't just use, but your kids and your grandkids end up inheriting. So you want to invest in your own health so that you can inspire them and you can have an heirloom to go along with it. So one more time, give us those websites and where people can follow you as well on social media, if anybody's on the Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or any of those other places.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So it's greatlakesgiryapro.com. That's for the smaller kettlebells and steel clubs and maces. And you go to greatlakesmethod.com. That's for the really large kettlebells, like just obscenely large kettlebells that are unnecessary, but people are buying them.
If people are buying them, then they are necessary. You can be assured of that. So, well, Colin, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. It was great chatting again.
Hey, I really appreciate the time. It was great to chat again with you. It's always a pleasure. And I think that folks listening to this will think about the window and their wrist position next time they're playing with their kettlebells.
Absolutely. Training, this is a window of opportunity, folks. So go to these websites, check this stuff out. And as always, have fun and happy training.